Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
1,100 tons of trouble. A steel beast in a bad mood. A super coaster, unlike any other in the world. Face Raging Bull, the biggest, first of its kind. High-twisting hypercoaster. At 20 stories, the tallest of 10 world-class coasters. Only at Six Flags Great America.
In 1999, Six Flags Great America introduced Raging Bull, a brand new Bolliger and Mabillard hypercoaster, serving as the park's signature attraction. Raging Bull was the second B&M hypercoaster ever built, rounding out Great America's world-class collection of roller coasters. This year, in 2024, Raging Bull celebrates its silver season, thrilling riders for 25 years. As a matter of fact, Raging Bull is running better than it ever has before, but we'll touch on that later. To this day, Raging Bull is still arguably the park's most popular roller coaster. Nonetheless, Raging Bull seems to be a polarizing coaster amongst the roller coaster community. This video serves as a review and analysis of this timeless coaster that will forever remain one of my all-time favorites. In 1996, Six Flags Great America opened a newly themed expansion to the park, Southwest Territory, themed after a western town. Back in the Marriott days, this themed land was initially planned to open in the late 1970s as the Great Southwest, but never came to fruition until the mid-90s. Anchored by the park's in-house wooden classic, Viper, which opened in 1995, Great America added 4 new flat rides to bolster this western-themed area. Chubasco, an enclosed teacup ride, River Rocker, a swinging ship, Ricochet, a Huss swing-around, and the now-defunct Trailblazer, a Zamperla Joker. In 1997, a 227-foot Intamin second-generation drop tower, Giant Drop, debuted, further rounding out Southwest Territory's lineup. To this day, Southwest Territory remains Great America's most immersive land. Throughout the years, Southwest Territory has lost its touch, but I am told that it was maximally themed in its glory days. Throughout the area's short history, a major hole was waiting to be filled, and this solution came in the fall of 1998 when Great America announced Raging Bull to be the land's anchor piece. Raging Bull opened to the public on May 1, 1999 to many positive reviews. As I mentioned before, Raging Bull was the second hypercoaster ever built by B&M, opening shortly after Apollo's Chariot at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. However, what makes Raging Bull so unique over B&M's now 14 different hypercoasters is the ride's unconventional hyper layout. Raging Bull is a hyper twister coaster, meaning that the track weaves around itself, making for many dynamic turns throughout the ride, opposed to the traditional out-and-back style layout, chock full of camelback hills. Raging Bull only offers 2 traditional camelbacks, one after the main turnaround and the second coming off the mid-course brake run. Don't worry, I'll talk about the infamous trim brake in a bit. Despite this, Raging Bull still offers some legendary airtime moments and some sweet dynamic turns, like B&M's early take on a wave turn and a fantastic and intense figure-8 finale. Raging Bull opened sporting an orange track and wine support color scheme. The ride was repainted in 2008, but is severely due for another one, as the track and supports are awfully faded. The ride also opened with a super dope 3-dimensional entrance sign, which was replaced with the 2D sign of the ride's primary logo back in 2009. The ride is loosely, and I mean loosely, themed after a savage bull that terrorized the citizens of a western town, to which its citizens fled to a new settlement, the Southwest Territory. The ride station is themed to the ravaged, abandoned mission from the old town. Now, let's get into Raging Bull's ride specifications. Raging Bull stands at a staggering height of 202 feet, and the hill can be spotted from anywhere throughout the park and the surrounding area of Gurnee. The first drop, however, is 208 feet as the coaster dives into an underground tunnel during its first drop, which sits at a mediocre angle of 65 degrees. Raging Bull still stands as Great America's tallest roller coaster as of the recording of this video. Unlike many of Great America's roller coasters, Raging Bull is a long ride with 5,075 feet of track. The park claims the experience lasts over 2.5 minutes, but I clocked it in at just about 1 minute and 5 seconds from the pre-drop to the moment it roars into the brakes. To put that into perspective, if Goliath and Raging Bull dropped off their lifts at the same time, Goliath hits its brake run as Raging Bull enters its mid-course brake run. Raging Bull reaches a top speed of 73 miles per hour at the bottom of its first drop. Raging Bull doesn't feature a speed-centric layout, so the sense of speed is not the main takeaway from this ride. Raging Bull does not usually have the greatest pacing, with fast valleys and slower peaks, but this is all dependent on the way that the ride is running. Raging Bull features 3 trains: Train 1, the Teal Train, Train 2, the Yellow Train, and Train 3, the Red Train. Raging Bull's trains are B&M's classic hypercoaster trains, and if you've ever sat in them, you know they are some of the most comfortable trains around. The cars are sideless, adding to the vulnerable feeling riders get throughout the experience. Each train has 9 rows with 4 cross seating and features clamshell restraints with no seatbelts. The lack of seatbelts and 9 rows on each train makes for some insane airtime moments throughout the ride. Nowadays, the park only runs 2 trains until Fright Fest rolls around, which is unfortunate, and I'll touch on that later. Whereas earlier in the ride's history, the park would receive its 3rd train around the time that daily operations began. Before riders start their journey, each guest passes through the entry portal and into the ride's simplistic queue. The lack of theming mentioned earlier is exemplified in this barren queue. The main queue house consists of switchbacks and a winding path down to the Flash Pass merge point. As seen here, Raging Bull features an extended queue that commonly fills up on busy weekends and during Fright Fest. With the main queue full and the ride running 3 trains, expect an approximate wait time of around 30 minutes. With 2 trains, expect a 45-minute to an hour-long wait time. With 3 trains and the overflow queue open, expect a wait time around 90 minutes to 2 hours. And if they're only operating with 2 trains and the overflow is open, forget about it. After the merge point, riders climb a few flights of stairs into the old mission, serving as the ride station. Most of the time, riders are free to choose whatever row they please. For the craziest and most intense experience, riders should choose the last row, row 9. This is single-handedly the best way to experience Raging Bull. Without sitting in row 9 or even row 8, the ride's signature moments will not be as accentuated. The ejector airtime is wicked in the back. Needless to say, you need to try the back seat. I cannot stress enough how mental the last row is. For more pops of floater airtime, give the front row a try. The ride speed is also more prominent up front. Raging Bull features a unique loading spiel that I'm sure frequent flyers can recite word for word.
Welcome to the Raging Bull. This train is leaving the station in 30 seconds.
You get the point. After the restraints are swiftly checked, trains are dispatched into a small 180-degree turn that sets the ride into the lift hill. Raging Bull's lift hill is quite intimidating. Trains take roughly 55 seconds to climb to the top, with the loud clanking sounds of the anti-rollbacks in your face, further adding to the anticipation. Once you reach the top, you'll experience a slight tease as the lift heads straight into a pre-drop. Raging Bull is one of the only hypers to feature a pre-drop, and thank God it's there. The pre-drop sets the ride up for one of the world's best first drops in the back row. Nothing on the planet comes close to the insane ejector airtime riders will get heading into the main drop. The airtime is criminal in the back seat. Your thighs will be pinned to the restraint the whole way down, slamming back into your seat into the intense valley of the tunnel. If you're up front, you will completely miss out on the strong ejector felt in the back. I can honestly say that this is my favorite first drop of any coaster. Sure, there are taller drops with amazing floating sensations like Fury 325 at Carowinds or Intimidator 305 at King's Dominion, and epic ejector moments like Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens Tampa or Skyrush at Hershey Park. Not even El Toro's first drop can compare to Raging Bull's nonsensical ejector airtime. The shallow 65-degree angle of the drop is completely ignored because of the intense airtime that you experience. Even the middle rows offer some amazing floating sensations as Bull rips down its drop. I cannot get over the insanity that is Raging Bull's first drop, especially if you have some give between yourself and the restraint. The drop starts the ride with a bang, and luckily this is not the only time that riders will experience ejector air like this. As the train heads into the tunnel, your senses are skewed with the loud roar of the train and a brief moment of darkness. Raging Bull then ascends into its hammerhead turn. While this turn is high off the ground, this is easily the weakest point of the ride for me. The train does not exert much force, and the speed is mostly at a lull at the peak of the turn. It simply serves as a way to turn the train around, a staple of the Hyper Twister layout. I wish it gave an intense feeling like Diamondback, Mako, or Nitro's hammerhead turns. Immediately following is the ride's main Camelback hill. This hill is quite large, but this can be the most temperamental part of Raging Bull. The way the train takes this hill solely determines the rest of the ride experience. This Camelback features the infamous trim brake. I'm not going to lie and say this does not put a damper on the airtime riders will receive, because it does. Front row riders receive a decent dose of floater, while the riders in the back get some slight pull as the train descends its hill. For much of the ride's life, this trim grabs hard. However, I've had many rides where the trim does not hit as much, which is blissful. I said earlier that this trim would grab hard for most of the ride's life, but as of right now, it barely hits at all, transforming the rest of the ride. During the 2023 season, the trim grabbed way lighter as well, and trains noticeably flew over this camelback. This is even exemplified by watching the ride from the ground. This season, the trim seems to grab the train even less, almost at a bare minimum. Without the trim, this hill is easily one of the best B&M camelbacks in existence. While Mako's famous camelback offers airtime that lasts a lot longer, Raging Bull gives a stronger dose of air. Again, in the back, your thighs are pinned to your restraint and you feel as if you're going to be launched into orbit. It completely rivals the Mako Hill and definitely beats out the greatest airtime found on Diamondback. And I should mention, Diamondback and Mako are my respective other favorite hypers. In its current state, Raging Bull's camelback has left me slack-jawed each and every time. I will address how the seemingly trimless effect influences the rest of the ride shortly. After the camelback, Raging Bull rises up into a wave turn-like element. Calling it a wave turn is a stretch, because you are not even close to being tilted towards 90 degrees. The best part of the element is that it is very picturesque from the ground. The dive down from the wave turn gets extremely close to the exit path of the ride. When the trims are light, you take this turn with much more speed, significantly altering the forces on its descent. If you are on the right side of the train toward the back, you will receive some slight airtime as the track exits the bank. The following valley pulls some decent positive G-force as well. Again, this turn is not very notable aside from its graceful and blissful nature. After the wave turn, you rise up once again and bank to the left, diving back down to complete a 270-degree turn. This turn is taken with a decent amount of speed and offers some positive Gs. You are usually pinned to the back of your seat here. At the valley of this turn, you feel the positives once again. The train then rises up and careens into a right turn into the mid-course brake run. The train absolutely snaps into the block brake. The brakes tend to hit a little before Raging Bull sends you into another powerful dive. The way the ride is running this year, the brakes seemingly have no effect on the speed, making for an enhanced second half of the ride. The dive off of the block brake gives yet another stunning moment of ejector air in the back seat. This is definitely the second best moment of airtime on the ride, as you are mercilessly whipped down the drop with a considerable amount of speed. In 2024, riders in the front even experience an aggressive jolt at the apex of this drop. After more ejector, the ride heads into its second and smaller camelback. The angle of this camelback's peak is not as sharp, but riders toward the front receive a nice dose of floater air, whereas riders in the back are whipped over, being ejected on the train's descent. I absolutely love how the train flies over this hill before setting up for the ride's finale. The following turn is very flat and high off the ground. The flat nature of the turn gives some very mild laterals, but also provides a moment to breathe before some more ejector air. As the train dives into its figure 8 finale, known as the Final Frenzy, the back of the train is relentlessly whipped down yet again. This drop is short, so the sudden ejector is met with some quick positives as the train quickly bottoms out. This is the third instance of wicked ejector in the back seat. As the Final Frenzy begins, trains pass over Raging Bull's second trim brake. The amount that this brake hits is dependent on how fast the train has taken the course after the block brake. Many times this trim never hits, but in 2024 it grabs the train every single time. I couldn't even imagine how intense this finale would be without the slight reduction in speed from this trim brake. The train swoops to the left in a very low turn, immediately rising up to the right and back down again. This upward turn to reverse the train is pretty intense, again pinning you to the back of your seat, especially if you're up front. Raging Bull again quickly banks to the left in another super low bank turn. This is Raging Bull's last-ditch effort to terrorize riders as the train rises into the final brake run. The Final Frenzy ends the ride with a bang, which really makes Raging Bull feel complete. I like describing the Final Frenzy as pure fun. Sure, these turns don't whip you around like the Maverick-style twists, but the swiftness of these turns, mixed with its intense moments, make for an exhilarating end to a phenomenal ride. Before I conclude this review session, there is no doubt that I am biased towards Raging Bull. Nevertheless, Raging Bull is still an amazing ride, throwing all bias out of the window. I also would not say that this ride is glass smooth. It definitely has a rattle in some of its valleys, but this does not ruin the experience. In fact, I believe it adds to the intensity. I would also not label Raging Bull as an aggressive ride. Yet, there are plenty of aggressive moments and razor-sharp pops of air throughout the experience. Your experience on Raging Bull will definitely vary based on when you ride it, as I have experienced this attraction in just about every form. I've had rides where the air is weak and the main trim kills every last bit of pacing. I've had glorious rides during morning test runs where the train is flying even without a train that's full of riders. Lastly, I've experienced many staggering rides so far in the 2024 season where the train absolutely shreds through the course. If you are lucky enough to have experienced Raging Bull in its peak form, this coaster is an easy 10 out of 10, and it always will be in my heart. I can subjectively say that this is my favorite roller coaster of all time. Notice how I said favorite and not best roller coaster. There is no denying that a ride cannot be perfect if there are certain conditions that need to be met in order to fulfill its greatness. That is why I would objectively rate Raging Bull as a 9 out of 10. Roller coasters are always subjective to the rider, and that is the beauty of this passion of riding roller coasters. That being said, Raging Bull deserves its flowers. Now let's get into a more technical analysis of this ride. I've had the pleasure of operating Raging Bull for thousands upon thousands of cycles. Not only is Raging Bull a masterpiece to ride, it is an operational masterpiece. I mentioned earlier how Great America unfortunately operates Raging Bull with only 2 trains during the summer now. Raging Bull is a capacity monster, and only running 2 trains significantly hurts this. The park has a rotating schedule of which train is rehabbed during the summer. In the 2024 season, Raging Bull is currently operating with its Teal Train and Yellow Train, meaning that the Red Train is undergoing maintenance. Hopefully, the maintenance team can get the Red Train on the main line earlier than Fright Fest this year, since Great America is having a busy summer already. When running 3 trains, Raging Bull has a theoretical capacity of 1,560 riders per hour, with the train being able to be dispatched roughly every minute. 1,560 riders per hour equates to around 43 hourly cycles. Sometimes, with a great crew, Raging Bull can reach nearly 50 cycles in an hour, blasting the ride's theoretical capacity. Even with a halfway decent crew, Raging Bull can pump trains like nobody's business. When Raging Bull operates with 2 trains, the theoretical capacity looks more like 1,040 riders per hour. However, that number is rarely ever met due to the empty seats on each train, as Raging Bull seldom operates with a grouper. I'd say that Raging Bull's hourly throughput with 2 trains is closer to 900 riders per hour, given the conditions. If you take a look at the ride's block zones, you'll see that there are many. Raging Bull consists of a station block, lift block, block brake, brake run, which is comprised of the safety brakes and service brakes, and the transfer track. When the ride is running in automatic mode, the safety brake and service brake are lumped into one block zone. With 3 trains, crews can dispatch a train once the previous train drops off the lift, which is roughly 50 seconds after the next train parks in the station. There is nothing more satisfying than checking the restraints and waiting for the previous train to clear the lift block. With a great crew, this is easily attainable. Dispatching Raging Bull at this interval allows for a beautiful crossover moment between the train ascending the lift and the train entering the block brake. You know Raging Bull is at its peak when you see the train on the lift above the train on the block brake. This crossover moment is a trophy of efficient operations. Without nailing this interval, stacking one train is bound to occur. Stacking all 3 trains is a rarity on Raging Bull with an efficient crew. When all 3 trains stack, one train sits in the station, while the other trains are parked in the transfer and safety brakes respectively. Achieving the perfect interval can be difficult due to a few factors. 1 being the guests in their loose articles, and 2 being the guests trying to exit the ride within the small size of the unload side of the station. These factors can be detrimental to achieving Raging Bull's minimum interval. I've always wished that the station could be rebuilt to allow for a less congested unload experience. In this day and age, the loose article battle is a tough one to win. One solution would be to require guests to place their loose articles in a locker, but I don't think that's the best route to go. The best solution I've found is to have 2 team members on the exit side of the platform. One to handle guests accessing the ride with an ADA pass, and another to assist guests in placing their loose articles in the bins provided in the station. Raging Bull usually has one of the best crews in the park year after year, for a good reason. With 2 trains, the only difference is that ride crews must wait for the previous train to clear the block brake before sending the next train. Hitting this interval is quite easy, as there is a lot more time between the minimum dispatch intervals. Trains theoretically could be dispatched once the previous train clears the lift during 2-train operation, but the block brake interval is implemented to refrain from the station being without a train for a long period of time. After all, stacking would occur almost every cycle if such a large gap was left between the loading and unloading of a train, especially with the more relaxed pace of two-train operations. Speaking of rolling trains, Raging Bull is about as reliable of a roller coaster as it gets. Raging Bull rarely experiences downtime throughout daily operation. Most of the time when Raging Bull goes down, it's due to a guest illness, which is not even a fault of the ride. Occasionally, crews may mispark a train in the station, which causes downtime. Other downtimes may occur due to common issues with proximity switches along the ride's course. Raging Bull operates with a combination of proximity switches and photo eyes to control the ride speed and monitor the block zones and other operations. The ride may throw a trouble light if there's any slight discrepancy between the sensors and the ride's control system. One last thing I need to talk about is the Teal Train, which is one of the reasons why Raging Bull is running so great in the 2024 season. Earlier, I described moments of an intensified Raging Bull experience, and the best way to experience this is by riding the Teal Train. The main trim brake and block brake are hardly slowing the Teal Train down. This season, Raging Bull is hitting the final brake run around 4.5 seconds faster than normal. I believe the Teal Train is running so much faster because of its wheel compound. Normally, Raging Bull's trains run with mostly polyurethane wheels. Polyurethane wheels are softer, making for a smoother ride experience, but also creating more friction along the ride's rails. Presumably, Raging Bull's Teal Train is operating with nylon wheels, which are harder, creating less friction and a more aggressive ride. Now, this is not confirmed, but is only my speculation. I cannot think of any other rational reason why the Teal Train is running much more wild. This factor, combined with the trim brakes barely grabbing the trains this year, results in an unhinged ride experience. Riding the Teal Train is like riding Raging Bull untamed. The ejector airtime is even more pronounced, and many of the ride's valleys are exerting an abundant amount of positive G-force. I also find that the turnaround immediately before the block brake is one of the most positive G-heavy parts of the ride. The entire ride, post-block brake, is intensified as well. I can proudly say I have had my best rides ever on Raging Bull this year thanks to the aforementioned conditions. I was also lucky enough to have some generous room between myself and my lap bar for some of those rides, further highlighting my experience. Those rides were honestly some of the most demented and wicked runs I've had on any of the 200 plus roller coasters that I've ever ridden, so much so that I was inspired to make this video. Thus, making Raging Bull an iconic, criminally underrated B&M masterpiece, with or without the wild way that it's running this season. If you have made it to the end of this video, I hope you were able to gain a deeper insight into everything Raging Bull. If you enjoyed this type of content, please leave a like to let me know to make more videos like this in the future. And to Raging Bull, thanks for being the coaster I have the greatest connection to. If you haven't already, make sure to venture out to Six Flags Great America and enjoy some rides on the untamed beast that is Raging Bull.